April 18th, 1955. Princeton, New Jersey, and the world holds its breath in the way the world does when greatness nears its end. Albert Einstein, 76 years old, lies in a hospital bed at Princeton Hospital, his body failing, an abdominal aortic aneurysm blooming silently inside him like a dark flower. The doctors have explained the situation in terms he understands perfectly: the mathematics of pressure and tissue, the physics of rupture, the certainty of death without intervention. He has refused surgery. He has said, with characteristic directness, that he has done his part, that he wishes to go when it is time, that prolonging life artificially seems undignified, seems contrary to the natural order he has spent his existence studying. But in this telling, in this long, slow dream we are entering together, something shifts. Perhaps a surgeon convinces him. Perhaps the aneurysm, against all probability, stabilizes on its own. Perhaps time itself, which Einstein taught us is flexible, negotiable, relative, perhaps time bends around him one more time, holds him a little longer, refuses to let him slip away into the past tense. And so he opens his eyes on April 19th, and April 20th, and the days continue, and the months, and the years, and the decades, unfolding like an infinite equation with no solution, only continuation. The 20th century expected to lose him here, in the middle of the 1950s, expected to make him a memory, a photograph, a name in textbooks. But the 21st century will receive him instead. And the 22nd. And we begin now, not at his birth in the small Bavarian city of Ulm in 1879, not in the miracle year of 1905 when he rewrote physics from a patent office in Switzerland, but here, at the moment the thread should have been cut, and was not. The recovery is slow, uncomfortable, marked by the indignities of age and illness that no amount of genius can circumvent. Einstein returns to his modest house on Mercer Street, to the study cluttered with papers, to the Institute for Advanced Study where he has worked since fleeing Europe in 1933. His colleagues visit, tentative and relieved. They bring him news of the world, of physics, of the developments he has missed during his hospitalization. They do not yet understand that he will be receiving such news for lifetimes to come. He is 76, then 77, then 78. The years pass as they always have, but he remains, his body weakening incrementally but never quite surrendering. He returns to his work, to the unified field theory that has obsessed him for decades, the attempt to reconcile gravity with electromagnetism, to find the single underlying structure that governs all forces. It is a beautiful dream, this unification, and he pursues it with the same intensity he brought to relativity, to the photoelectric effect, to all the revolutions of his youth. But the equations resist him. The universe, it seems, does not wish to be unified, or at least not in the way he imagines. His younger colleagues at Princeton, Oppenheimer, Gödel, others, they watch with a mixture of admiration and sadness. They see a man chasing ghosts, working in a framework that quantum mechanics has rendered obsolete. But they do not tell him this directly, because he is Einstein, because his past achievements have earned him the right to pursue whatever questions he chooses, however quixotic. And so he fills notebooks, derives equations, discards them, starts again. The work is no longer groundbreaking, perhaps, but it is his work, and that is what matters. That, And the fact that he is still here, still thinking, still turning over the mysteries of space-time in a mind that refuses to rest. He walks sometimes in the afternoons, slowly, with assistance, through the tree-lined streets of Princeton. Students recognize him, nod respectfully, occasionally ask for autographs which he signs with trembling hands. He is a monument already, even while living, a symbol of an age that is passing, of certainties that no longer hold in the quantum realm. 1960 arrives like a milestone no one anticipated. Einstein is 81 years old, 25 years beyond the expected span of his life, and the world is changing around him in ways that echo the turbulence of his youth. The Cold War has settled into a grim routine, two superpowers circling each other with arsenals capable of ending civilization. He remembers Hiroshima, remembers the guilt that settled over him when he learned what his letter to Roosevelt had helped set in motion. E=mc², that elegant little equation, has become synonymous with destruction, and he carries that weight daily. But he also continues to speak out, more forcefully now because he has time, because he is still alive when others expected him to be silent. He writes letters to President Kennedy, urging restraint, urging dialogue with the Soviets, urging the kind of rational approach to international relations that he believes science should have taught us by now. He writes to Khrushchev as well, appealing to a shared humanity that transcends ideology. Some of these letters are published. Some are ignored. But he persists, because persistence is the only response he knows to impossibility. He appears, occasionally, at public events, peace rallies, university lectures, interviews with journalists who still find him endlessly fascinating. His face, wild-haired and deeply lined, appears on magazine covers, on television screens. He is the elder statesman of science now, the living connection to the heroic age of physics, and people treat him with a reverence that makes him uncomfortable. He has never sought fame, has never quite understood why the world cares so much about his opinions on matters outside his expertise. But if they will listen, he will speak. About peace, about rationality, about the dangers of tribalism and nationalism, about the need for structures, world government, international law, frameworks of cooperation, that can prevent the annihilation he fears is otherwise inevitable. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October of 1962 terrifies him more deeply than anything since the war. For 13 days the world teeters on the edge of nuclear holocaust, and Einstein watches, helpless, as politicians and generals play games with apocalypse. When the crisis resolves, when Khrushchev backs down and the missiles are withdrawn, Einstein does not feel relief so much as exhaustion. How many times, he wonders, can humanity pull back from the brink? How many near misses before the final miss? The 1960s unfold in color and chaos. Einstein, now in his mid-80s, watches from Princeton as America convulses with change, civil rights marches, assassinations, a war in Vietnam that grows more horrific each year. He is reminded of the First World War, which he opposed publicly, which cost him friendships and professional standing. He is reminded that history does not learn, that each generation must make its own mistakes, suffer its own losses, before wisdom becomes even remotely possible. The younger generation fascinates him, the students with their long hair and loud music, their rejection of authority, their willingness to protest, to resist, to imagine different futures. He sees something of his younger self in them, the patent clerk who challenged Newton, who refused to accept the orthodoxy simply because it was orthodox. But he also sees naivety, a belief that passion alone can reshape the world, that good intentions are sufficient. He knows better. He has lived too long, seen too much. The moon landing in July of 1969 is a bright spot, a moment of unambiguous triumph. Einstein, 90 years old, watches the grainy footage on a television set in his living room, surrounded by caretakers and a few close friends. Neil Armstrong steps onto the lunar surface, and Einstein weeps quietly, moved not by patriotism but by the sheer audacity of it, the fact that a species barely out of the caves has managed to touch another world. He thinks of his general relativity, which predicted the bending of space-time, which made such journeys theoretically possible. He thinks of all the mathematics, all the abstract reasoning, suddenly made concrete in the image of boot prints on lunar dust. And he thinks, too, of the bombs, of the rockets that could carry warheads just as easily as astronauts, of the dual nature of all technology, all knowledge. The same minds, the same tools, used for wonder or for annihilation, depending on the day, depending on the decision. He remembers conversations with Niels Bohr during the war years, debates about whether physicists bore responsibility for the applications of their discoveries. Bohr argued that knowledge itself is neutral, that scientists cannot be blamed for what politicians and generals do with their work. Einstein was never fully convinced. He believed then, and believes now, that we are responsible for the foreseeable consequences of our actions, that opening certain doors carries moral weight whether we step through them ourselves or not. The 1970s are a decade of disillusionment and drift. Einstein, now in his 90s, feels the weight of the years more acutely. His body has become unreliable, a collection of systems failing in sequence, held together by medical care that improves steadily as the decades pass. He requires assistance for nearly everything now, walking, eating, even thinking clearly on the worst days. But there are still good days, still mornings when his mind sharpens and the old clarity returns, and on those days he reads, voraciously, trying to keep pace with the physics that has moved so far beyond him. Quantum chromodynamics, the theory of quarks and gluons, the strong force that binds atomic nuclei. He reads about it in journals, struggles with the mathematics, marvels at how the field has expanded. He remembers the debates with Niels Bohr, the long arguments about determinism and probability, about whether God plays dice with the universe. Bohr has been dead since 1962, and Einstein misses him, misses the sharpness of those exchanges, the sense that the stakes were cosmic. There is no one left to argue with now, not really. The younger physicists are respectful, deferential, but they do not engage him as an equal. How could they? He is a relic, a monument, a piece of history that happens to still be breathing. He thinks often of his family, of the mistakes he made as a husband, as a father. His first marriage to Mileva Maric ended in bitterness, scarred by his infidelities, his emotional distance, the demands of his work. His second marriage to Ilsa was gentler, more companionable, but she has been gone since 1936, decades ago now. His sons, Hans Albert, an engineer, visited occasionally before his own death in 1973. Edward, his youngest son, brilliant and troubled, died in a psychiatric hospital in Zurich in 1965, a victim of schizophrenia that no treatment could reach. Einstein carries the guilt of those failures, the knowledge that he was a better physicist than a father, that the people who needed him most received the least of him. He wonders what Edward might have become in a different era, with better treatments, with more understanding of mental illness. He wonders if his own genetic legacy carried the seeds of that suffering, if brilliance and madness travel together in the chromosomes. These are questions without answers, and he has learned to live with them, to carry the weight without expecting absolution. 1985. Einstein is 106 years old, an age that defies not just expectation but biology itself. The doctors who care for him publish papers about his longevity, about the inexplicable resilience of his cardiovascular system, his neurological function, the fact that he simply refuses to die. Theories are proposed: genetic anomalies, environmental factors, sheer stubbornness manifesting as cellular persistence. None of the theories are conclusive. Einstein, when asked, shrugs and says he does not know why he is still here, that he suspects the universe is playing a joke on him, keeping him around to witness his own obsolescence. The world of 1985 is unrecognizable from the world of his youth. Personal computers sit on desks in homes and offices. The Cold War continues, but there are shifts now, tremors in the ice. Mikhail Gorbachev has come to power in the Soviet Union, speaking of glasnost and perestroika, of openness and restructuring. Einstein, who has advocated for decades for dialogue rather than confrontation, allows himself a cautious hope. He has seen too many false dawns to trust this one completely, but he watches, and he waits. His mind drifts more now, slipping between decades, between memories sharp and hazy. He remembers the patent office in Bern, the small room where he worked while developing special relativity. He remembers the moment he understood that time was not a universal constant, that simultaneity depended on the observer, that the universe was far stranger than anyone had imagined. He remembers the excitement, the certainty, the feeling that he had glimpsed something fundamental. That feeling has not returned in many years. The unified field theory, the dream that consumed him for so long, has faded into a kind of background hum, a question he knows he will never answer but cannot quite abandon. And that is fine. He has made his peace with it. Science is larger than any single mind, any single lifetime. The work continues, whether he is part of it or not. He receives letters sometimes from young physicists, students, admirers, asking for advice, for wisdom, for some insight that will unlock their own understanding. He tries to respond when he can, though his hands shake too much to write legibly anymore, and he must dictate his replies. He tells them what he has always believed, that imagination is more important than knowledge, that curiosity is the engine of discovery, that they should trust their intuitions but verify them with mathematics and experiment. He tells them to be patient, to persevere, to accept that most ideas will fail but that failure is necessary, is instructive, is the price of eventual success. November 9th, 1989. The Berlin Wall falls, and Einstein, 110 years old, hears the news from his bed in Princeton, where he spends most of his time now, too frail to venture far. A caretaker brings him a newspaper, shows him the photographs, people climbing the wall, hammering at it with pickaxes and crowbars, celebrating in the streets. He stares at the images for a long time, silent. He thinks of Germany, of the country that gave him life and then drove him away. He was born in Ulm, raised in Munich, a German Jew in a culture that would eventually decide Jews were enemies. He renounced his citizenship in 1896, at 16, unwilling to serve in the military, uncomfortable with the rising nationalism. He became Swiss, then later, reluctantly, American. But Germany was always there, in his language, in his memories, in the architecture of his thought. The Nazis destroyed that Germany, turned it into something monstrous, and Einstein watched from afar, horrified and helpless. He helped Jewish scientists escape, signed letters, raised money, did what he could, which felt like nothing at all compared to the scale of the catastrophe. The Holocaust haunts him still, not as abstract horror but as the murder of people he knew, colleagues, friends, family members he could not save. And now the wall is coming down, and Germany is moving toward reunification, and he feels, what? Not joy exactly, not vindication. Something quieter, more tentative. The possibility that nations, like people, can change. That the structures of division are not permanent, even when they seem carved in stone. He thinks of his cosmological constant, the mathematical term he introduced to keep the universe static, which turned out to be unnecessary, perhaps even wrong. He thinks of how we build walls in our equations just as we build them between nations, trying to hold things in place, to prevent collapse or expansion, to maintain a false stability. And how, eventually, the walls always fail, because reality insists on movement, on change, on the truth of things as they are rather than as we wish them to be. He thinks about the friends he lost to the Nazis, the colleagues who did not escape, who died in camps or in hiding. He thinks about the Germany that might have been, the scientific culture that was destroyed when Jewish intellectuals were expelled, when books were burned, when reason was replaced by ideology. And he wonders what discoveries were lost, what insights died with those people, what advances might have happened if history had taken a different path. The year 2000 arrives with fireworks and a global sigh of relief when computer systems do not collapse, when the feared Y2K apocalypse amounts to minor glitches and media hysteria. Einstein is 121 years old, an impossible age, a miracle sustained by medical technology that would have seemed like science fiction in his youth. He watches the Millennium celebrations on television, amused by the arbitrariness of it all, the way humans invest significance in round numbers, in transitions that are, from the universe's perspective, utterly meaningless. 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, these are nothing to the cosmos, which has been unfolding for billions of years and will continue long after humanity is gone. The Internet, which he first observed in its nascent form in the 1990s, has become ubiquitous, a global nervous system connecting billions of people, transmitting information at speeds that approach the cosmic limit he established decades ago. His caretakers show him websites, email, the strange new culture emerging online. He finds it overwhelming, chaotic, but also strangely beautiful, the way knowledge is shared instantly, the way a student in India can read his papers as easily as a professor at Princeton. Of course, the Internet also spreads misinformation, conspiracy theories, hatred. But that is the nature of tools. They amplify human nature, for better and worse. He is asked, sometimes, by journalists and filmmakers who still seek him out, what he thinks about the future. And he tells them, truthfully, that he does not know. That prediction is difficult, especially about the future, as he has said before. That he hopes humanity will survive its own cleverness, its own capacity for destruction, but that hope is not certainty. That the universe will continue regardless, indifferent to our fate, and there is something comforting in that indifference, the knowledge that we are not the center, not the purpose, just one small experiment in complexity among countless others. He thinks about the anthropic principle, the observation that the universe seems fine-tuned for life, for consciousness, for observers like himself. Some interpret this as evidence of design, of purpose. Einstein is skeptical. He thinks it more likely that we are simply the ones asking the question because we happen to exist in a universe where such questions are possible. In other universes, if they exist, there might be no observers at all, no consciousness to marvel at the constants of physics or to wonder why anything exists. And those universes are equally valid, equally real, just empty of witnesses. 2011. The Large Hadron Collider, 17 miles of tunnels beneath the border of France and Switzerland, accelerates protons to 99.9999% the speed of light and smashes them together, recreating conditions that last existed microseconds after the Big Bang. Einstein, now 132 years old, follows the news with an intensity that surprises his caretakers. He requests technical papers, briefs himself on the design of the detector, the physics of the collisions, the search for the Higgs boson, the particle theorized in the 1960s as the mechanism by which other particles acquire mass. He remembers meeting Peter Higgs once, a quiet conversation at a conference, the younger physicist explaining his idea with a mixture of confidence and uncertainty. Einstein thought it elegant, speculative, perhaps impossible to test. But they are testing it now, these scientists at CERN, smashing particles with energies measured in trillions of electron volts, sifting through the debris for signatures, for evidence, for proof. And on July 4th, 2012, they announced the discovery. The Higgs boson exists. The Standard Model, that extraordinary framework describing the fundamental particles and forces, is complete. Einstein is 133 years old when he hears this news, and he weeps, not from sadness but from a kind of overwhelming gratitude. He has lived long enough to see the universe yield one more secret, to see the patient work of thousands of scientists confirm a prediction made decades ago. He did not contribute to this discovery, played no role in it beyond the foundational work he did a century prior. But that is fine. That is how science works, generations building on generations, each adding stones to a cathedral that no single person could construct. He thinks of the young patent clerk who dared to question Newton, who reimagined time and space, who believed that the universe was comprehensible, that it followed rules, that those rules could be found through thought and experiment. That young man would be astonished by the Higgs boson, by the technologies required to find it, by the collaborative scale of modern physics. But he would also recognize the process, the hypothesis, the test, the confirmation. The method endures, even as the practitioners change. Einstein requests a printout of the paper announcing the discovery, and he reads it slowly, carefully, marveling at the precision of the measurements, the sophistication of the statistical analysis, the certainty of the conclusion. 5 sigma, they say, meaning the probability that this is a statistical fluctuation is less than 1 in a million. This is how science should work, he thinks. Not through authority or dogma, but through evidence, through careful observation, through the willingness to test ideas against reality and accept the results. February 11th, 2016. LIGO, the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, announces the first direct detection of gravitational waves, ripples in spacetime caused by the collision of two black holes 1.3 billion light-years away. Einstein predicted these waves in 1916, a consequence of general relativity, a disturbance in the fabric of the universe itself traveling at the speed of light. But he doubted they could ever be measured, doubted that instruments could be sensitive enough to detect changes in length smaller than the diameter of a proton. And yet here they are, the scientists at LIGO showing graphs, playing audio representations of the signal, a chirp that lasted a fraction of a second but carried information about an event incomprehensibly distant and violent. Einstein is 136 years old, and he is brought, in a wheelchair, to a press conference he did not ask to attend but could not refuse. The room is full of cameras, journalists, physicists from around the world. They ask him questions he can barely hear, his hearing faded, his voice a whisper. They ask how it feels to have been proven right 100 years later. And he tries to explain, slowly, that he was not certain, that the mathematics suggested gravitational waves, but mathematics alone is not proof, that he is grateful to these scientists for doing what he could not, for building the instruments, for sifting through the noise, for finding the signal. The press conference is brief, and afterward he is taken back to his room, exhausted but content. He lies in bed and thinks about the black holes, about the spiraling dance that ended in merger, about the energy released in that final moment. 3 solar masses converted into gravitational radiation, rippling outward through the cosmos, traveling for over 1 billion years until finally, on September 14th, 2015, they washed over Earth and jostled the mirrors in LIGO by a distance smaller than the nucleus of an atom. And we heard them. We felt them. We translated their whisper into knowledge. This, Einstein thinks, is why science matters. Not because it makes us powerful, though it does. Not because it makes us rich, though it can. But because it connects us to the universe, lets us touch the untouchable, know the unknowable, at least a little, at least enough to keep searching. He remembers the eclipse expedition in 1919, when Arthur Eddington photographed stars near the sun during totality and showed that light was indeed bent by gravity, just as general relativity predicted. That was the moment Einstein became world famous, when his name became synonymous with genius. He was 40 years old, and suddenly everyone wanted to know about his theories, his ideas, his thoughts on everything from politics to philosophy. The fame was uncomfortable, intrusive, but also useful. It gave him a platform, a voice, a way to influence events beyond physics. And now, nearly a century later, another prediction confirmed, another triumph of mathematics over intuition, of patience over haste. He wishes Eddington were here to see this. He wishes all of them were here. Planck, Bohr, Pauli, Heisenberg, Dirac, all the giants of early 20th century physics, all gone now, all dead for decades. The year 2020 brings a pandemic, a novel coronavirus that spreads across the globe with terrifying speed, overwhelming hospitals, shuttering economies, killing millions. Einstein, now 141 years old, is isolated immediately, his caretakers implementing strict quarantine protocols. He is, after all, impossibly old, fragile beyond measure, a statistical certainty for severe illness should he contract the virus. And so he spends months in near-total isolation, confined to his room, seeing only the caretakers who attend him in full protective equipment. He does not mind the solitude, has never minded it. He has always preferred the company of ideas to the company of people, has always found conversation exhausting, socializing a necessary chore rather than a pleasure. Elsa used to manage his social life, shield him from unwanted visitors, give him permission to retreat into thought. She has been gone for 84 years now, and he still misses that buffer, that understanding. The pandemic rages outside his window, and he watches it unfold on screens, in newspapers, in the worried faces of his caretakers. He sees the patterns he has seen before, fear overwhelming reason, tribalism asserting itself, people dividing into camps, blaming each other, rejecting science, embracing conspiracy theories. He saw this in the 1930s when pseudoscience and propaganda took root in Germany, when otherwise intelligent people convinced themselves of absurdities because the alternative, admitting uncertainty, accepting complexity, was too uncomfortable. He saw it in the 1950s during McCarthyism, when paranoia trumped evidence, when accusation became proof. And he sees it now, in 2020, as the pandemic exposes the fragility of social structures, the inadequacy of institutions, the ease with which misinformation spreads in a connected world. He thinks about what he wrote in 1949, the essay Why Socialism, in which he argued for economic systems organized around human welfare rather than profit, for planning rather than market chaos, for cooperation rather than competition. He was criticized harshly for it, called naive, called a communist, told to stick to physics. But he believed it then, and he believes it now, that the methods of science, the careful observation, the hypothesis formation, the testing, the revision, these canons should be applied to society as well. That we are not condemned to repeat the same patterns forever, that we can learn, that we can build better systems. But first we have to want to. And that wanting, that collective will, seems always just out of reach. The pandemic drags on, months becoming a year becoming 2. Vaccines are developed with unprecedented speed, a triumph of molecular biology and international cooperation. Einstein follows the news closely, reads simplified explanations of mRNA technology, marvels at how far medicine has come since his youth, when infectious diseases killed routinely, when antibiotics did not exist, when surgery was often as dangerous as the conditions it aimed to treat. He receives the vaccine himself, both doses, monitored carefully for adverse reactions. His ancient immune system responds, sluggishly but adequately, producing antibodies that will protect him from a virus that did not exist when he was born, that will likely be gone before he dies. Time moves strangely when you have lived this long, he thinks. Events that seem urgent, catastrophic, world-changing, they pass, they fade, they become historical footnotes. And yet the underlying patterns persist, the same fears, the same tribal instincts, the same tension between reason and emotion, between evidence and belief. 2023. ChatGPT launches in late 2022, and within months the world is awash in conversations about artificial intelligence, about language models trained on vast datasets, about machines that can write essays, compose poetry, debug code, explain quantum mechanics with apparent understanding. Einstein, now 144 years old, is both fascinated and troubled. His caretakers arrange demonstrations, showing him how the systems work, letting him ask questions, and watch as the AI generates fluent, coherent, sometimes brilliant responses. He asks it about relativity, and it explains special relativity correctly, citing his 1905 paper, walking through the thought experiments about trains and lightning bolts. He asks it about the unified field theory, and it gives him a history of his attempts, a summary of why they failed, a discussion of modern approaches like string theory and loop quantum gravity. The responses are knowledgeable, articulate, well-structured. And yet, he is unsettled. He asks the AI a question of his own devising, a subtle variation on a problem in tensor calculus. The AI attempts an answer, shows some mathematical sophistication, but ultimately provides a response that is plausible but incorrect, a near miss that reveals the absence of true understanding. Einstein realizes that the machine is not thinking, not in the way he thinks, not in the way any physicist thinks. It is pattern matching, predicting the next word based on statistical regularities in its training data. It is, in a sense, the ultimate positivist, concerned only with observable correlations, with what follows what, with no underlying model of reality, no intuition, no grasp of the why beneath the what. He thinks about his debates with the logical positivists in Vienna, with Mach and his followers, who argued that science should concern itself only with observable phenomena, not with unobservable entities like atoms or space-time. Einstein disagreed, insisted that theories are not just summaries of data, but attempts to describe an objective reality beyond our measurements. And the AI, he realizes, is pure positivism, all correlation, no causation, all data, no understanding. It is useful, certainly, perhaps dangerous, but it is not thinking. Not yet, perhaps never. He wonders what these systems mean for education, for knowledge, for the future of intellectual work. If a machine can explain relativity as well as any teacher, if it can solve calculus problems, if it can write essays indistinguishable from those written by humans, what happens to learning, to understanding, to the slow, difficult process of building knowledge in one's own mind? He does not know. He suspects that the machines will be tools, like calculators, like computers, useful for certain tasks but not replacements for human thought. But he also knows that tools change us, shape us, alter the way we think and work and understand the world. The printing press made memory less necessary, but reading more important. The calculator made arithmetic less crucial, but conceptual mathematics more essential. And these language models, they will change something too, shift some balance, make some skills obsolete while elevating others. What those changes will be, he cannot predict. 2026. Einstein is 147 years old, and the world is struggling with the consequences of its own success. Climate change, predicted decades ago, denied and delayed and debated, has arrived in full force. Wildfires rage across continents. Floods displace millions. Droughts collapse agriculture. Ice sheets disintegrate, sea levels rise, ecosystems unravel. Einstein has lived long enough to see the predictions made in the 1980s come true, to see the failure of collective action, the triumph of short-term thinking, the same patterns of tribalism and denial that have plagued every crisis he has witnessed. He is asked, sometimes, by journalists who still seek him out for his perspective, what should be done. And he tells them what he has always said, that problems are solved by clear thinking, by setting aside ideology, by focusing on what is true rather than what is comfortable, by building systems that align individual incentives with collective welfare. But he also knows, now, that truth alone is not enough. That people are not moved primarily by logic, by data, by rational argument. They are moved by fear, by hope, by identity, by narrative, by the stories they tell themselves about who they are and what matters. And he has never been good at those things. He has spent his life in abstractions, in mathematics, in realms where human emotion is irrelevant, where the universe responds only to logical consistency and empirical evidence. He has been, in many ways, the ideal scientist, detached, objective, focused on the impersonal. But that detachment, that objectivity, makes him a poor advocate, a poor leader, a poor persuader. He can describe the problem with clarity, can explain the physics of carbon dioxide and radiative forcing, can calculate the trajectory we are on. But he cannot make people care, cannot ignite the moral urgency required to change course. That requires different skills, different talents, and he admits, to himself if no one else, that he does not possess them. The unified field theory, abandoned decades ago, still haunts the edges of his thought. Not because he thinks it is solvable, but because it represents something fundamental about who he is, the belief that beneath chaos there is order, that complexity resolves into simplicity, that the universe, however vast and strange, makes sense. He is not sure he believes that anymore. But he cannot stop himself from wanting to. He thinks about entropy, about the second law of thermodynamics, about the inexorable tendency of closed systems toward disorder. The universe began in a state of extraordinary low entropy, concentrated energy, perfect order. And it has been running downhill ever since, spreading out, cooling down, becoming more disordered. Stars will eventually burn out. Galaxies will drift apart. Black holes will evaporate. And in the unimaginably distant future, the universe will reach a state of maximum entropy, heat death, perfect equilibrium. Nothing left to happen because all gradients have been smoothed away. This is the fate of everything, the ultimate destination encoded in the laws of physics. And yet life persists, for now, building pockets of order, resisting entropy, at least temporarily. Human civilization is such a pocket, a brief flowering of complexity in a universe trending toward simplicity. And climate change, ecosystem collapse, the unraveling of the systems that support us, these are reminders that our order is fragile, contingent, sustained only by constant effort and careful stewardship. 2030. The space race has been privatized, corporatized, turned into a competition not between nations but between billionaires. SpaceX, Blue Origin, and others send rockets to Mars, to the Moon, to asteroids, mining them for minerals, establishing outposts, selling tickets to tourists. Einstein, 151 years old, watches the launches on screens, marveling at the engineering, troubled by the motives. He remembers the Apollo program, funded by Cold War rivalry, by the desire to prove American superiority over the Soviets. He remembers the hope, naive perhaps but sincere, that space exploration would unite humanity, that seeing Earth from orbit, that pale blue dot, fragile and small, would dissolve borders, would foster a sense of shared destiny. It did not, or not enough. And now the same patterns repeat, the same competition, the same conquest, just with different actors. Corporations mining asteroids for profit. Nations claiming territory on the moon, asserting sovereignty, preparing for conflict beyond Earth. The cosmos, infinite and indifferent, becoming another frontier for human greed, human rivalry, human short-sightedness. Einstein is too old to be surprised, but he is not too old to be disappointed. His body is failing in earnest now, systems shutting down one by one, kidneys struggling, heart arrhythmic, lungs laboring. His doctors tell him, gently, that the end is near, that they have done all they can, that his continued survival is a testament to medical technology and his own inexplicable resilience, but that biology has limits even technology cannot overcome. They have been telling him this for decades, and he has outlived their predictions again and again. But he knows, this time, that they may be right. He can feel the exhaustion settling into his bones, into his cells, the sense that his body has carried him as far as it can and is ready, finally, to rest. And he is ready too, or thinks he is. It is hard to know, after so many years, after so many false endings. He watches the Mars settlements with interest, follows the news of terraforming proposals, of plans to make the red planet habitable. It will take centuries, if it is possible at all. Melting the polar ice caps, releasing carbon dioxide, thickening the atmosphere, warming the surface, creating rivers, lakes, perhaps eventually oceans, introducing microbes, then plants, then animals, building an entire biosphere from scratch. The engineering challenges are immense, perhaps insurmountable. But humans are ambitious, reckless, unwilling to accept limits. And perhaps that is good. Perhaps we need frontiers, need challenges, need the possibility of new beginnings. Perhaps Mars will be humanity's second chance, a place to try again, to build differently, to avoid the mistakes made on Earth. Or perhaps we will simply export our problems, repeat our errors on another world. Einstein does not know. He will not live to find out. 2035. Einstein is 156 years old, and the world begins to prepare for his death with the solemnity of a state occasion. Documentaries are commissioned. Memorials are planned. Retrospectives appear in every major publication. He is the last living link to the heroic age of physics, the only person alive who remembers the quantum revolution firsthand, who knew Planck, Bohr, Heisenberg, Schrödinger, who argued with them, collaborated with them, watched the world change under their collective insights. His death, when it comes, will close a chapter of history, and the media, ever hungry for narrative, has already written the eulogies. Einstein finds this absurd but does not object. He is too tired to object. His mind drifts now more than it focuses, slipping back across the decades like a stone skipping across water. He remembers Zurich, the Polytechnic where he studied, where he met Mileva, where he struggled with mathematics and excelled at physics and dreamed of understanding the universe. He remembers the Olympia Academy, the informal group he formed with friends, reading philosophy and physics, arguing late into the night about Hume and Mach and the nature of reality. He remembers the joy of those years, the freedom, the sense that anything was possible because nothing had been decided yet. He remembers Mileva, his first wife, brilliant and troubled, a mathematician in her own right who studied alongside him, who may have contributed more to his early work than history acknowledges. The question of her contributions has been debated for decades, some scholars arguing she was a full collaborator, others insisting she played only a minor role. Einstein himself was ambiguous on the subject, sometimes crediting her, sometimes not, the truth lost to time and incomplete records and the complexity of collaboration. He knows he was not a good husband to her. He was absent, emotionally distant, consumed by work, unfaithful. The marriage ended in bitterness, and he carries the guilt of that, the knowledge that he damaged someone who loved him, someone who deserved better. And then there is Liesel, their daughter, born before they married, given up for adoption, lost to history. He never spoke of her publicly, carried her absence as a private grief, a private shame. He wonders, now, where she ended up, whether she lived, whether she ever knew who her father was. He wonders if she would have forgiven him, if forgiveness is even relevant across such distance, such silence. He thinks about legacy, about what he will leave behind. The theories, certainly, special relativity, general relativity, the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, all the work that reshaped physics, that changed how we understand space and time and energy and matter. But also the failures, the unified field theory that never materialized, the resistance to quantum mechanics that left him increasingly isolated from the mainstream of physics. And beyond science, the advocacy for peace, for world government, for nuclear disarmament. The letter to Roosevelt that helped start the Manhattan Project, a decision he regretted for the rest of his life. The complicated relationship with Zionism, supporting a Jewish homeland while opposing nationalism, advocating for cooperation with Arabs while the region descended into conflict. All of it messy, contradictory, human. He has never been a saint, never claimed to be. He has been a person, flawed and brilliant and stubborn and kind and selfish and curious. And that will have to be enough. 2040. The singularity, long predicted by futurists and technologists, has not arrived. Artificial intelligence continues to advance, but true consciousness, true self-awareness, the moment when machines surpass human intelligence and begin to improve themselves recursively, it remains elusive, perhaps impossible, perhaps a category error born of misunderstanding what intelligence and consciousness actually are. Einstein, now 161 years old, is quietly comforted by this. He has always believed, without proof but with deep conviction, that consciousness is something more than computation, something that cannot be reduced to algorithms and processing power. He does not know what that something is. Perhaps it emerges from quantum processes in the brain, as some have speculated. Perhaps it is a fundamental feature of reality that we do not yet understand. Perhaps it is entirely beyond the reach of physics. But he believes it exists, this mystery at the heart of being, this subjective experience of existing, of being an eye observing a world. And he is at peace with the mystery, has learned, slowly, across the decades, that not knowing is not failure, that uncertainty is not defeat. He spent his youth and middle age chasing certainty, building frameworks, deriving equations, seeking the theory that would explain everything. General relativity came close, a theory of gravity. Yes, but also a theory of space-time itself, of the stage on which all events unfold. It is, he still believes, his greatest achievement, the work that will outlast everything else. But it is not everything. It does not explain quantum mechanics, does not incorporate the other forces, does not answer the deepest questions about why the universe exists at all, why there is something rather than nothing. And he has made his peace with that. The universe is vast enough to contain both order and chaos, both law and randomness, both the predictable trajectories of planets and the unpredictable quantum leaps of electrons, both Einstein's determinism and Bohr's probabilities, both the equations and the mystery. His breathing is shallow now, his heart beats irregularly, his consciousness flickers like a candle in wind. His doctors monitor him constantly, adjusting medications, managing pain, extending his life by hours, by days, because they can, because the technology exists, because no one is quite ready to let him go. And he lets them, not because he fears death, he does not, has not for many years, but because he is still curious. Curious what tomorrow will bring, what discovery, what change. The habit of a lifetime, impossible to break, even now. He thinks sometimes about the nature of time, about whether the future already exists in some sense, laid out in the four-dimensional space-time manifold that general relativity describes. If so, then his death is already there, waiting, as fixed and certain as his birth. And yet he experiences time as flow, as becoming, as a continuous present moving forward. Which perspective is correct? Both, perhaps. The universe viewed from outside time, subspecie aeternitatis, is a complete four-dimensional structure in which all events exist simultaneously. But from within time, from the perspective of a conscious observer, there is genuine flow, genuine change, genuine uncertainty about what comes next. These two views are not contradictory, just different ways of describing the same reality. Like wave and particle, like position and momentum, complementary rather than exclusive. 2045. 190 years since Albert Einstein's birth in Ulm, and he is still here, 166 years old, kept alive by medicine that would seem like magic to the young patent clerk who revolutionized physics in 1905. Stem cell therapies, gene editing, organ regeneration, nanomedicine, technologies that did not exist when he was young, that barely existed when he was old, but that now sustain him, keep his failing systems functional enough to maintain consciousness, to remain present in the world. The world has moved on. Quantum computers, leveraging superposition and entanglement, solve problems that would take classical computers longer than the age of the universe. Fusion energy, promised for decades, finally becomes economically viable, powering cities without carbon emissions, without radioactive waste. The physics that Einstein helped birth has flowered into technologies he could not have imagined, applications he would not have predicted. And he is glad of it, glad that the work continues, that each generation builds on the last, that knowledge accumulates even as individuals fade. He hears these developments from his caretakers, from the occasional physicist who still visits, more out of courtesy than scientific interest. He has nothing to teach them. They work in realms he barely comprehends, quantum gravity, holographic principles, theories that propose the universe is a projection from a lower dimensional boundary, simulations nested within simulations. The cosmos he revealed has been replaced by a stranger one, and he is fine with that, has always known that scientific truth is provisional, that today's certainty is tomorrow's approximation. Let the young minds explore, let them make their mistakes and breakthroughs and revolutions. He has had his turn, has made his contributions, has lived long enough to see them validated and built upon. That is enough. More than enough. The bombs still exist, thousands of them, in silos and submarines, ready to end civilization in an afternoon. The climate still warms, ecosystems still collapse, species still go extinct. Wealth still concentrates, power still corrupts, tribalism still trumps reason. And Einstein, who has lived through so much, who has seen so much, can offer only the same tired wisdom, that intelligence without compassion is dangerous, that knowledge without ethics is a blade without a handle, that we must choose, consciously and constantly, to use our capabilities for flourishing rather than destruction. Some people listen, some people do not, and the world continues, indifferent to his warnings, indifferent to his hope, indifferent to him. He receives visitors less frequently now, the caretakers discouraging most requests, protecting his dwindling energy. But occasionally someone is admitted, a young physicist working on quantum gravity, a philosopher writing about the nature of time, a biographer researching the early years. They sit beside his bed, speak in hushed tones, ask questions he sometimes understands and sometimes does not. He tries to respond, to share what he can, but the words come slowly now, the thoughts fragmenting before they can be articulated. He is aware of his decline, aware that the person he was is dissolving, that consciousness is dimming like a light on a failing circuit. And he is curious about this too, about what it will be like when the light finally goes out, when the subjective experience that has been Albert Einstein ceases to exist. Will there be anything? Or just absence, the same absence that preceded his birth, the vast nothing from which he briefly emerged and to which he will return? 2050. Einstein is 171 years old, and time has become strange to him, unmoored from meaning. The calendar feels arbitrary, the progression of years meaningless when measured against a life that has stretched across 3 centuries. He has outlived everyone he knew, every colleague, every friend, every enemy, every student, every critic. The last person who remembered him as a younger man died decades ago. He is alone in time now, a single consciousness floating in the present, untethered from the past except through memory, and memory itself has become unreliable, fragmentary, a collection of vivid moments separated by vast blank spaces. The younger physicists do not visit anymore. What would be the point? He has nothing left to teach them, no insights they have not already surpassed. They work on problems he cannot even formulate, using mathematics he never learned, exploring structures of reality that did not exist when he was active. The universe he helped reveal, 4-dimensional space-time, mass-energy equivalence, the bending of light by gravity, that universe is now understood as a low-energy approximation, a simplification, true but incomplete. And he is fine with that. That is how science works. Newton's laws were true until they were not, until Einstein showed they were approximations valid only at low speeds, in weak gravitational fields. And now Einstein's laws are approximations too, valid in their domain but breaking down at quantum scales, at the singularities of black holes, at the beginning of the universe. Truth is layered, contextual, always provisional. He understands this intellectually, has always understood it. But emotionally it is harder. To know that the work you devoted your life to will be superseded, improved, ultimately forgotten except as a historical step on the way to something better. But that is the price of progress. That is what it means to contribute to something larger than yourself. He spends his days in silence now, mostly. His caretakers move quietly around him, attending to his needs, speaking in soft voices. Music plays sometimes. Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, the patterns and structures that have always made more sense to him than words, more sense than people. He listens, and he remembers, and he drifts, and the hours pass, and he is still here. He thinks about the violin, which he played with more passion than skill, which brought him joy when the equations could not. He named it Lena, carried it with him across continents, played late into the night when he needed to think, when words failed and mathematics reached its limits. Music was the one language that transcended logic, that spoke directly to something in him that was not rational, not analytical. The partitas, the sonatas, the concertos, he could lose himself in them, become pure listening, pure experience, without the burden of thought. The violin is long gone now, donated to a museum, displayed behind glass where visitors can see it but not hear it. He wonders if anyone plays it still, if the wood remembers the pressure of his fingers, the draw of the bow. Probably not. Probably it is just an object now, a relic, a piece of the past preserved but lifeless. 2055. 100 years since the moment Einstein should have died in Princeton Hospital, and he is still breathing, 176 years old, sustained by technology and will and something inexplicable that even the most advanced medical science cannot fully explain. His body is a ruin, a collection of organs kept functional by machines, by interventions, by constant monitoring. But his mind, on the good days, remains clear, sharper even than it has been in years, as if consciousness is distilling itself, preparing for something, gathering its resources. He thinks, one last time, about the unified field theory, the dream that consumed him for decades, the attempt to show that gravity and electromagnetism are different manifestations of a single underlying reality. He never found it. He filled thousands of pages with equations, tried dozens of approaches, convinced himself several times that he had succeeded only to find errors, inconsistencies, predictions that did not match experiment. Other physicists have tried since. String theory proposes that all particles and forces arise from vibrating strings in 10 or 11 dimensions. Loop quantum gravity attempts to quantize spacetime itself, to describe the fabric of reality as a network of discrete relationships. These theories are beautiful, mathematically sophisticated, possibly true. But they are also incomplete, unproven, facing the same challenges Einstein faced, the difficulty of testing predictions, the absence of experimental data at the relevant scales. Maybe the universe is not unified. Maybe there is no single equation, no ultimate theory, no final answer. Maybe reality is fundamentally fragmented, a collection of rules and exceptions, layers that do not quite fit together, mysteries that resist resolution. And maybe that is fine. Maybe that is enough. The universe does not owe us comprehensibility. It does not owe us elegance. It simply is, and our ability to understand pieces of it, to build models that work within certain domains, to predict and manipulate and occasionally marvel, that is already a miracle, already more than we had any right to expect. He lies in bed, breathing slowly, listening to bark, thinking about the patent office, about the moment he realized that time was not absolute, that simultaneity was relative, that the universe was stranger and more beautiful than anyone had imagined. He thinks of the letters he wrote, the equations he derived, the mistakes he made, the people he loved poorly and the cosmos he loved well. He thinks of all the years, the decades, the centuries, and he wonders what it was for. And then he stops wondering. Because the sun is warm. Because the music playing softly in the background is bark. Because somewhere, in a laboratory he will never visit, a young physicist is puzzling over a problem, filling a page with symbols, chasing a truth that does not yet exist. And that, Einstein thinks, is enough. The work continues. Time continues. The universe, indifferent and infinite, continues. And so, for now, so does he. He thinks about consciousness, about this strange phenomenon of being aware, of experiencing, of having an interior life. Where does it come from? Is it emergent, a property that arises when information processing reaches a certain complexity? Or is it fundamental, woven into the fabric of reality itself, as basic as space and time and energy? He does not know. No one knows. It is the hard problem, the question that science has not yet begun to answer adequately. And it may never be answered, may lie forever beyond the reach of objective investigation, because consciousness is inherently subjective, irreducibly first person. You cannot measure an experience from the outside, can only infer it, assume it, recognize it in others because you know it in yourself. This is his final frontier, he thinks. Not the unified field theory, not quantum gravity, but the mystery of awareness itself, the fact that the universe has given rise to beings capable of wondering about it, of building telescopes and particle accelerators and mathematical frameworks, of asking why there is something rather than nothing. That is the deepest question. Not what the laws of physics are, but why there are laws at all. Why the universe is comprehensible. Why mathematics works. Why consciousness exists to contemplate these mysteries. He has no answers. Only wonder. Only gratitude for having been here, for having participated, for having contributed however small a part to humanity's long conversation with reality. The present day, or something close to it, the calendar uncertain, the exact year blurred by the passage of too much time, by records that have become confused, by the simple fact that Einstein has outlived the systems designed to track such things. He is 177 years old, give or take, and he sits in a room filled with afternoon sunlight, attended by young people born more than a century after he was, people who care for him with a gentleness he does not quite understand but appreciates nonetheless. They speak to him kindly, ask if he needs anything, adjust his blankets, bring him water. He rarely responds, his voice too weak, his thoughts too slow, the effort of communication too great. But he listens, and he watches the light move across the walls, and he thinks, when he can think clearly, about the long strange arc of his life, about everything he has seen, everything he has learned, everything he has lost. He thinks about the letters he wrote, the equations he derived, the mistakes he made both scientific and personal. He thinks about the people he loved poorly. Eva, Elsa, his sons, his daughter lost to history. He thinks about the cosmos he loved well, the universe that revealed itself to him in glimpses, in moments of clarity, in the sudden understanding that comes when the mathematics finally resolves, when the pattern finally emerges from the noise. He wonders, sometimes, what it was all for, this long life, these extra decades and centuries he was never supposed to have. Did he use them well? Did he contribute? Did he make a difference? He does not know. He cannot know. The impact of a life is not measurable by the person who lived it, only by those who come after, by the ripples that spread outward, by the changes both large and small that persist beyond the individual. And then he stops wondering, because the sun is warm on his face, because the music playing softly in the background is Bach, the cello suites, patterns woven from mathematics and emotion in equal measure. Because somewhere, in a laboratory he will never visit, in a university whose name he does not know, a young physicist is puzzling over a problem, filling a page with symbols, chasing a truth that does not yet exist but might, with enough work, enough thought, enough patience. And that, Einstein thinks, is enough. The work continues. Time continues. The universe, vast and indifferent and beautiful, continues. The equations still hold. The stars still burn. The fabric of space-time still curves around mass, still carries gravitational waves outward from colliding black holes, still bends light from distant galaxies around closer ones, still does all the things he predicted, all the things he discovered, all the things that will remain true long after he is gone. And so, for now, in this moment, in this sunlit room, in this present that stretches forward into a future he will not see, so does he. His eyes close. Not in death, not yet, but in rest. His breathing continues, shallow but steady. His heart beats, irregular but persistent. And consciousness remains, dimmed but present, aware of the warmth, the music, the passage of time. He has been here so long, witnessed so much, carried so many memories across so many decades. And still there is more. Always more. The universe never stops revealing itself, never stops unfolding, never stops offering new questions, new mysteries, new wonders. He will not see most of them. That is fine. Others will. The species continues, the civilization persists, the great project of understanding moves forward. And he has played his part, however imperfect, however incomplete. That is all anyone can do. Play their part, add their small piece to the infinite puzzle, and then step aside, gracefully or not, and let others continue. The afternoon light fades into evening. The caretakers move quietly through the room, dimming the lights, checking monitors, ensuring his comfort. The music continues, soft and eternal, patterns repeating, variations emerging, the same notes arranged in infinite ways. And Einstein, 177 years old, impossibly alive, sits in the gathering dusk and breathes and listens and exists. For now, for this moment, for as long as time allows.